This week I want to talk to you a little bit about participant selection. For really powerful statistical analysis, random sampling of your participants is ideal, but you probably won't be able to do this. And you might even be doing a case study, so you'll have even less, um, your participants will be limited. But you need to think about the criteria for choosing participants, and if you are going to look at different groups, for choosing groups. If you don't have a choice about the groups, for example, maybe you're using two different classes that come into your library, then you need to think about how these factors might affect your results, and make sure that you mention these factors when discussing the results. So these are some of the variables that you might think about, some of the different things you might think about as factors when you're choosing groups, or um, when you discuss, perhaps in the end, what effect some of these factors might have on your data, and what data you collected. For example, with gender, you need to think about, are your groups equal in gender? Or do you have more boys or more girls? And is this going to make a difference? Maybe it won't. Maybe even you make it a variable. You're looking at how girls perform on a certain intervention versus how boys perform on a certain intervention, whether to decide that there is no difference, or that girls perform better or boys perform better. So you need to kind of think about this in terms of how you will deal with it, either in making up the group or during your methodology chapter. In chapter 3, you can talk about why the gender might not make a difference, or why you're particularly choosing one gender over another, or if you're making it a variable. Or you can discuss it in chapter 5 when you discuss your results, and say that the results might have been skewed because you were unable to make a change in the gender distribution, and you feel that there may be a difference. Age, the same thing. Are the groups the same ages? If you have maybe a makerspace that you're doing after school, a makerspace club during lunch or after school, where you're going to have participants of different ages, perhaps that would have a different outcome than all the same ages, because maybe the older kids help the younger ones, or maybe they do something different in the intervention, or respond to your intervention differently because they're at different developmental stages. Socioeconomic status also could be a factor. If you have a range of socioeconomic status in one class, you might see differences. If your whole class, if the two groups you're comparing are of comparable SES, then it might not make a difference. This sometimes is more of a factor, I think, if you've read studies where they're doing interventions at different schools, and collecting data at different schools, that you need to take into consideration, are the schools pulling from a similarly distributed population in terms of socioeconomic status. You also want to consider cultural background and language. Are they English language learners? Do you have the same percentage of English language learners in multiple groups? Do you is there something about their cultural background that might make them bring something different, not better or worse, but just different to the intervention? Will they understand it differently because of where they come from? If you have a chance, maybe you can balance out your groups so that you have a similar number of English language learners in each group. I mean, English language learner could be something that you're studying, if they respond to some kind of intervention, but it could also be, if you're able to make up groups, you want to balance balance people who are English language learners. They may not be able to understand the assessment if they're English language learners, and that's going to affect your data. Academic level, again, do you have a mix of academic levels in each of your group? If you're doing two classes, do you have an honors level class and a non-honors level class that's coming in? And how's that going to change your data? And maybe your hypothesis is that it will help both groups increase. But if you're comparing the two groups, maybe you need to at least note that they are from different academic levels, so that the person reading your thesis will have that information, and be able to make their own judgment about that. Skills is another area too. Does everybody come into it if you're using something, say you want them to fill out a form on Google, does everybody have the same technology skills to be able to do that? Or do you have different skills? If you think about the digital divide, many people are well versed. The penetration of mobile phones is pretty deep, but digital broadband and computer access is not as deep. So maybe somebody will be skilled with using their phone, but not so skilled at filling out forms on a laptop or a desktop or even a tablet. So these are just things to think about. If you have an ability to develop multiple groups, and you're comparing a control group against an intervention group, or you have multiple interventions that you're using with different groups, the strength of your conclusions will be much stronger if you make an effort to take into consideration these factors when you're developing those groups. And if you have no chance to affect these factors due to whatever reason, your class as a group as a whole, which that doesn't actually make sense, but you have different classes coming into the library and you're comparing 3 third grade classes or something, you wouldn't have a chance to rearrange them, and it may be that those classes, for whatever reason, were not developed equally, and to have an equal amount. So you just need to acknowledge that, say what you're going to do, how you're going to take that into consideration, or even if you think it will affect. Maybe you don't think that what you're doing, that any of these factors will affect what you're doing, because maybe you are taking everybody and teaching them the skills and technology first, and then everybody can go from a level playing field. Or maybe language isn't going to affect the cognitive intervention that you're doing, etc. So or you're doing a case study or repeated multiple measures on a few people or one group, then that will not have the effect that different groups with very different makeups would have. I talked a little bit last week about permissions. I'd like you to email me the next week or so and let me know that you've talked to your principal and what permissions are required. Sometimes the principal will ask you, and I spelled principal wrong, gosh darn it. Sometimes the principal will ask you to submit a proposal, or the superintendent or board will want to see a proposal, and the basic things you probably want to include, if they don't let you know, are a title, which can be whatever title you have determined for your thesis, a statement of the problem and purpose of the study, which should be a very condensed version of what you've written in Chapter 1, no more than maybe a paragraph, the two combined. General plan of study, again, very condensed. Methodology, Chapter 3, where you just want to kind of give them an overview of what you're going to be doing, particularly what assessments you're going to be using, not a detailed outline like you're going to be giving me in Chapter 3, but just a real quick overview. Hypotheses, not necessarily written out more like the question that you asked to get to the hypothesis. And then the effect or benefit to students or school. And if you need to write this out, we can work on it, and I can try and find a sample for you. I was reading the sample that we've had in the past, and I realized I really don't like it. I don't like what they've chosen to use as a sample. So also, you might need, if the principal or superintendent or board asks you for it, you might need a permission letter. And I will post a sample letter and a link to IRB. I believe they still have sample letters on there. You need to assure parents that there's no penalty for their child not participating. Give a brief synopsis of the type of activities they'll be performing. What are the interventions, questionnaires, research project, and that there's no harm of any kind. There's nothing bad will happen to them, either by not participating or participating. One of the things to think about too as you develop your interventions or data collection methods is whatever you do for some students, you should plan on eventually doing for all students. So if you have, and I don't mean if you're a library and you have 24 classes coming in a week and you choose 3 of the classes because they're second grade classes, you don't need to necessarily do it for all 24 classes that come in that week. You might want to do it if you choose 2 of the 3 third grade classes. You might also want to do it for the third grade class, just for equality's sake. And you may find that intervention is not useful, so you may not need to do it for all students, unless it can somehow be perceived as favoritism by the students or the parents, that the kids are missing, you're giving something extra to the one set of kids, or they're missing out on something. For example, last year for the thesis class, one of my students was doing intrinsic versus extrinsic, a study on that, and she had 4 second grade classes, and some got prizes during the study. But after the study was over, she made sure that after she collected her data, she made sure that all of her students got to choose prizes, even the ones who did not get prizes but got praise during the 6-week data collection period, because she was looking at intrinsic motivation for them. She made sure that an equal number of students, that all of the students got an equal chance of getting prizes based on, she was asking if they had read the book the week before. So, in that case, particularly, students will share with each other what they get. So you do need to be careful of that and aware of what's going on. As I mentioned, oops, bring this up. I want to bring this one up. As I mentioned, I'm going to have you do the IRB, but there is a nice little form on the IRB website for Wayne Patterson that gives us a walkthrough as to when you need to absolutely submit a protocol. College of Ed students have a special little section here. If you're a teacher of record or in a pre-service placement and your research is pedagogical, if it's just your students, you probably don't need to submit a protocol. If it's not just your students, you might need to submit a review. So they have this nice decision tree. Do I currently plan to publish or present my findings in a formal professional, educational, or public setting beyond the requirements of this course? If you're going to try and get an article, write an article, do a presentation at NJSL, or even share the results with other teachers in your school in a formal presentation, well, actually, if you keep it to your school, it'll probably be fine. If you're doing it in a broader public setting, then you would need to submit a protocol. If you're not going to do that, no. Will it involve a special class of subjects? Probably not. Will I collect information that will identify my subjects in addition to the signature on a consent form? So you should actually work to ensure that your students, anything, your school should be anonymized and made anonymous in your when you're writing your thesis. So just put you're in a elementary school in a central, a northeastern, just in a northeastern school, elementary school. You don't even have to put that it's in New Jersey, although you could indicate that it's in New Jersey. But you don't want to name your school. That's what I want to say. You do want to kind of give them an idea if it's elementary, middle, or high school. And if it's a private school or some kind of special technical school, you could also indicate that. You also don't want to have any of your data collection actually have their names on it. So you should, when you collect data, you should have some kind of key for yourself that student 1 is Mary and student 2 is George, etc., etc. But you don't want that to, that doesn't go into your thesis at all and should be, I should not see it, and it should be kept in a secure place. So keeping your students' information private is important. And I guess there are some specialized kinds of research that would not be able to be kept anonymous, and you would definitely need to submit a protocol then. Will the research be about a highly sensitive topic that's not commonly studied in my discipline? I don't see any of you doing that. Will my research have a potential to cause a significant emotional or physical harm to my subjects or me? I really hope not. If they do, then yes, submit a protocol. So if you're not, even if you're not submitting the protocol, the IRB requirements need to be met. And that includes things like permission letters if required by the principal or a school board, respecting the subjects, treating them appropriately, informed consent. Students must be able to participate voluntarily and must be allowed to exit or end the research without penalty. We kind of talked about that under permissions, but yes, you cannot penalize any students because their parents don't want them in the research study. Ideally, they can still be part of the research study so that not even, I mean, your students, other than having their parents sign a form, ideally would not even know they were part of a research study unless you let them know that. Probably in most cases you don't want to unless you're doing some kind of survey. If you're doing a survey, obviously you're collecting information, but even still, where was it going with this? So ideally no other students will know that you're not even if they know they're in a study, they won't know who you're collecting information from and who you're not. I'm going to be monitoring, subject anonymity, safely storing data. You guys are used to protecting student confidentiality in terms of grades and not sharing it outside the classroom, and making sure that you safely store their private information within your classroom. So you need to just be careful. There is protocols when that you should keep the data particularly any identifying information in a locked storage cabinet so that it can't be, the anonymity is maintained. I will monitor your student research and because I'll be we're going to be working together throughout this. So this is the form that I'm going to be having you fill out for human research, just so you get an idea. This is something that they've decided that everyone should fill out, even if they don't actually submit it to the IRB because you aren't part of that decision tree, but they want you to fill it out and fill it out so that you understand what you need to do, even if you're not getting it approved. So this will be something we'll be working on in January. I hope to get it from you. If you need to have it in order to conduct the research in your school, we'll do it earlier so that you can begin research in January. If you don't need it, I hope to have, after you turn in your chapters 1 to 3, I'd like you to work on this. All right, and so that's it. This is the IRB, Office of Sponsored Programs, and you can see there's a student research FAQ, and this is the Word document I just showed you. Sample statements for informed consent are here so that you can work through, there's a bunch of different ones. Some of them we don't need. And obviously this human research is so interesting because there were people who took advantage of subjects and actually did psychological harm to them in the design of their research study. And of course, this is much easier to do in psychological studies and physical studies. I mean, Tuskegee Airmen was a study where they took advantage of, I think it was syphilis that black men had, and some got treated and some didn't, and they saw it was working, and that the other ones were getting sicker but did not let them know. And there's some other psychological experiments that were really interesting. So I'm going to give you the link to this, and that's it. And continue working. Thank you.